The voice that shook the world. The spark in Johannesburg. Did you hear what just happened? A young African president just stood before the most powerful figures on earth, locked eyes with Donald Trump, and said what no one else had dared. It wasn't a speech, it was a reckoning. A moment that sliced through decades of silence and shook the foundations of global politics. Ibrahim Traore didn't ask for dignity. He declared it. And with that, something irreversible began. The world had gathered for the Global South Leadership Forum, held this year in Johannesburg, South Africa, a city of gold revolution and rebirth. The summit was historic. For the first time, not only economic powerhouses, but leaders from historically overlooked nations stood shoulder to shoulder to reimagine a fairer, multipolar world. Inside the Sandton Convention Center, with its high glass walls gleaming under African sun, the air was rich with anticipation. Marble floors reflected polished shoes. Global media circled like hawks. This wasn't just another diplomatic gathering. It was a stage for something bigger. In that room were presidents, prime ministers, tech billionaires, oil tycoons, social reformers, and kings. But the attention slowly turned toward one man sitting quietly among them, his uniform stiff with honor, the flag of Burkina Faso stitched proudly on his chest. President Ibrahim Traore, young, unbending, and often underestimated. Across from him sat Donald Trump, the firebrand former president of the United States, whose reputation for blunt, unscripted remarks preceded him like a thunderstorm. The summit had moved into its keynote session, Africa and the World. A new chapter. Trump stepped onto the stage, his stride confident, his smile measured. Cameras clicked, microphones tilted. The crowd braced itself. As expected, Trump didn't disappoint. His speech was sharp and unfiltered. He praised American innovation, boasted of Western investments, and scoffed at international bureaucracy. Then he paused, smiled at the audience, and dropped a line that electrified the room. When you look at Africa, what do you really see? Be honest. Chaos, corruption, leaders who can't lead. Honestly, it's a mess. Total disaster. A few polite laughs echoed. Some murmured, some nodded in uneasy agreement. Others looked around, unsure of how to respond. But one man did not move. Traore didn't blink. He didn't whisper to his aides. He didn't check if the cameras were watching. He simply stood up. The room fell into a breathless silence. No one expected this. Not from a young president of a small West African country. Not in front of media from every corner of the planet. Not opposite Donald Trump. But Traore wasn't concerned with expectations. He was there for something far greater than political correctness. He walked toward the center of the stage. Calm, poised, unhurried. Every step sounded louder than the last. Cameras followed. Security froze. Trump raised an eyebrow. The audience sat still, their attention now hijacked by something raw and real. Traore turned to face the crowd, and then Trump. His voice was firm, not loud. He didn't speak with anger, but with truth. With all due respect, Mr. Trump, you have no idea what Africa is. You could hear a pin drop. The moderator tried to interject, but a single raised hand from Traore kept the stage. His heads turned. Phones were raised. Some gasped. Africa is not chaos. Africa is not corruption. Traore continued. Africa is resilience. Africa is spirit. Africa is 1,000 tongues singing one truth. We are not your caricature, we are your mirror. The line landed like lightning. Some people applauded softly, others leaned in closer. He looked Trump in the eye. When your ancestors came to our lands, they didn't find a mess. They found wealth, gold, wisdom, kingdoms. What came after? Slavery, colonization, exploitation. Our systems weren't built to fail. They were broken to serve others. Trump's expression tightened, but he said nothing. Traore pressed on. Yes, we have problems, but do you know why? Because our minerals power your smartphones. Our cocoa sweetens your luxury desserts. Our oil fuels your cars. And in return, our children starve. Our youth migrate, and our leaders get blamed, bought, or bombed. A wave of emotion began to ripple through the audience. Some officials nodded. Others looked uneasy. Traore paused and scanned the room, letting the silence stretch. You call us corrupt, but what about the Western corporations who bribe our ministers? What about the tax havens that swallow our wealth? What about the silence when your companies destroy our forests, poison our rivers, and rob our future? No one dared interrupt. Even journalists stopped scribbling. Then, in a voice that softened but grew heavier, Traore told a story. There is a boy in Burkina Faso. He is 12 years old. His name is Emmanuel. Every morning before sunrise, he walks 6 miles to fetch water for his family. On the way, he passes gold mines, gold he will never touch. That gold travels to your markets, to your banks. But Emmanuel studies by candlelight, eats once a day, and dreams, not of escaping, but of building a future for his village. He looked toward the cameras. That boy doesn't need pity. He needs justice. He doesn't need aid. He needs access. He doesn't want to be Western. He wants to be free. A hush fell over the room. Even Trump didn't speak. Not yet. What had started as a verbal skirmish was becoming something much bigger. This wasn't a rebuttal. It was a reckoning. A continent, long spoken over, was now speaking for itself, and it had found its voice. The room was frozen. A man in a crisp suit shifted in his chair. A royal advisor from Morocco clutched his notepad. Even the interpreter booths paused, translators unsure whether to continue or just listen. Ibrahim Traore had taken the stage, and no one dared look away. His voice, measured and deliberate, carried no venom, only a fire that had burned quietly inside generations of silent souls. In Johannesburg, on this very day, that fire found its heir. Behind the glass walls of the Sandton Convention Center, the world outside continued as if nothing had changed. But inside, everything had. The moderator, a seasoned diplomat from India, finally found his voice. "Thank you, President Traore," he said softly, his voice cracking under the weight of what had just happened. Would anyone else like to? But no one moved. Even Trump didn't speak. His hands rested on his lap, fingers drumming slightly. He wore his signature frown, but not one of irritation. It was something else. Thoughtfulness, maybe. Reflection? No one could tell. The silence stretched on until the clapping resumed. This time it wasn't polite. It was thunderous. From Latin American delegates to Southeast Asian ministers, even a few European heads of state, all rose. It wasn't a gesture of political alignment. It was human. Traore remained still. He hadn't asked for applause. He hadn't come for it. He had come to tell the truth, and now that truth was rippling across the globe. By the time the session ended, clips of Traore's confrontation with Trump were already trending on every social media platform. Africa speaks. Traore speaks truth. Johannesburg summit. Journalists were elbowing one another for a chance to get a quote. Anchors back in New York, London, Lagos, and Tokyo were interrupting scheduled broadcasts to air the clip. But while the world outside spiraled into reaction, inside the halls of the summit, something more intimate was unfolding. As the crowd filtered out for a break, some headed straight toward Traore, not just to congratulate, but to connect. President Celina Duarte of Brazil approached him with tears still glistening in her eyes. "You reminded us all why we entered politics in the first place," she said. "Not for power, not for profit, but for people." He nodded quietly. A Cambodian minister shook his hand. "I thought I was alone in thinking the world has been upside down. Turns out we just needed someone to say it out loud." Even leaders from African nations, once critical of Traore's rise, approached him with new regard. His path to power had been unconventional, marked by military transition and populist rhetoric. Critics had called him dangerous, unpredictable, but today they saw something else: clarity, courage, vision. In a quiet corner, a small girl of about 11, part of a youth delegation invited to observe, stood nervously clutching a notepad. Her badge read Zinzi Mathembu, student, Soweto. She didn't speak at first, just. Traore noticed her and bent slightly, his presence softening. "Hi," he said gently. She swallowed hard. "Thank you for speaking for us," she whispered. "For the ones who feel small." He reached for her notepad and signed the corner of it. "Never forget," he said. Your voice is a power too. Outside, the sun had begun to set over Johannesburg, casting golden light over the skyline. But inside, the summit was far from over. A press conference was scheduled later that evening, and the media room was already overflowing. Microphones were labeled from every network imaginable: CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, SABC, France 24, NHK, and everyone had one question. What would Trump say now? He had remained quiet during the aftermath of Traore's speech. Some thought he'd left the building altogether. Others speculated that he was meeting with advisors. But Trump was still there, watching, waiting. Later that night, he took to the podium. Flashbulbs burst like lightning. Reporters leaned forward. I've heard a lot of speeches in my time, he began. Some are boring, some are good. That one, Traore's, was powerful. Didn't agree with everything, but I'll give him this. He's got guts. He paused, then added, and guts matter, especially in a world where everyone's afraid to offend somebody. It wasn't an apology, but it was respect, Trump's version of it, anyway, and that alone said everything. Across Africa, celebrations had already begun. In Ouagadougou, crowds gathered around public screens playing the clip on loop. Young people waved flags. Mothers cried. Artists painted murals overnight. Radio hosts couldn't go a full hour without referencing the Johannesburg moment. And in that moment, something shifted. Not just in how Africa saw itself, but in how the world saw Africa. For the first time in decades, the continent wasn't begging to be heard, it was demanding to be understood. And Traore, the soldier turned president, had lit the match. In university halls in Dakar and Nairobi, professors replaced their lectures with discussions about the speech. In Ghana, students recited excerpts in classroom. In the Congo, miners gathered by firelight, listening to the radio and nodding in silent pride. It was more than politics now. It was poetry. It was pain turned into purpose. It was history, written not by victors but by voices long ignored. And it was only the beginning. For the next morning, Traore was scheduled to deliver another address. This time, not to presidents or cameras, but to the youth of Johannesburg, invited from townships, schools and universities. That speech, many said later, was even more powerful than the first. Not because of what he said, but because of who heard it. The auditorium was smaller than the Grand Hall from the day before, but no less electric. Rows of teenagers in school uniforms sat shoulder to shoulder, eyes wide, backs straight, as if sensing something bigger than themselves was about to happen. The energy in the room was different here. It wasn't political. It wasn't diplomatic. It was pure. Here at the University of Johannesburg's youth campus, hundreds of students, most from underserved communities, were gathered not for a lecture but for something much more personal. President Ibrahim Traore had asked specifically for this meeting. No fanfare, no press, just the youth. As he stepped onto the low stage, dressed this time not in full military uniform but a simple tan suit with the Burkina flag pinned near his heart, the room erupted. Some clapped, some shouted. A few just sat in stunned silence, unsure how to react to a man who had become a continental icon overnight. He waited, then he spoke. Yesterday, Traore began. I addressed presidents. Today, I address the future. A murmur ran through the crowd. I didn't come here to give you hope, he continued. You already have that. I came here to give you something else, truth. The room leaned in. For too long, the world has told Africa that we are behind, that we must catch up, that we are poor, broken, in need of saving. But look around you. Who taught you to code with no laptops? Who builds solar panels from scrap? Who studies under candlelight and still ranks top in math? A cheer went up. You are not behind, he said. You are being held back. Silence. Deep, aching silence. A girl in the third row wiped her eyes. A boy in the back leaned forward, elbows on knees. Traore continued. You are told to dream of leaving, of crossing oceans, of living in someone else's future. But what if I told you the future is not across the sea? What if the future is right here in your hands? He held up a small rock, just a simple stone. This, he said, is cobalt. Do you know where it comes from? A few students nodded. The Congo, someone whispered. Yes, And do you know where it goes? They nodded again. Europe, America, China. Traore smiled faintly. And do you know what it becomes? Silence. It becomes batteries, phones, cars, the future. He paused. You carry the ground of the future under your feet, but others drive it, others profit from it. You're told you're lucky to be hired at the factory. A small wave of realization spread across the room. I'm not here to make you angry, Traore said. Anger burns fast. I'm here to make you awake. An awakening that burns forever. In the corner, a young woman raised her hand. What do we do? She asked. How do we change it? Traore looked at her. Really looked. Start by not believing the lie, he said. You are not less. You are not late. You are not lost. He walked down from the stage into the crowd. No podium, no script. You want to change Africa? He said, walking past students. Then don't wait to be rescued. Don't wait to be hired. Build, create, learn, and when you rise, take someone with you. The room stirred. You don't have to become me, he added. You just have to become yourself, fully, unapologetically, powerfully. A boy near the aisle stood. His uniform was torn at the sleeve. His shoes didn't match, but his voice was steady. They laughed at me for wanting to be an engineer, he said. Said it was a white man's dream. Traore turned, then laughed back. And build anyway. Build better. Build louder. Until they stop laughing and start asking how you did it. Another boy stood up. My father was a miner. He died in a tunnel collapse. He said, he never got to see what came of the gold. Traore placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. Then let his legacy be more than labor. Let it be justice. Let it be you. Tears were not hidden anymore. They flowed freely, out of pain, yes, but also recognition. The pain of generations, the recognition of possibility. Traore stepped back toward the front. You are the dream they tried to bury, he said. But seeds don't die in the dark. They grow. A thunder of applause erupted, not of fandom, but of awakening. As he exited the room, one girl stood and shouted, "We are not chaos." The crowd responded in unison. "We are the future." The chant continued long after Traore had left. In the hallway, he paused, watching through a glass window as they kept going. An aide approached him. "Sir, the next session is in 10 minutes. Traore didn't respond immediately. He watched the students, watched the fire he had helped light spread through their bodies, their voices, their hearts. Then he turned and said, quietly but firmly, "Let them burn brighter than I ever will." Outside, the Johannesburg wind carried the chant across campus. Inside, a new generation had just been born, not of age, but of awareness. And the revolution was no longer a speech. It was a song rising. While the campus still echoed with chants from the youth rally, the world beyond South Africa's borders was rapidly reacting. Newsrooms scrambled. Social media surged. It wasn't just the video of Traore's confrontation with Trump anymore. It was the follow-up speech to the youth that sealed something deeper. This was no longer a moment. It was a movement, from Nairobi to New York. Tweets poured in. We needed this voice. We needed this courage. We needed this Africa. App just is rising. Traore isn't just speaking to the West. He's speaking to all of us who've forgotten what leadership looks like. Prof Kimani, Nairobi. The world will remember Johannesburg. Africa. First. Zoe Kabila. In Mali, a rap artist dropped a freestyle on TikTok using Traore's words as the hook. They see chaos, we see kings. We don't beg, we build things. In Kenya, a teacher printed out the entire youth speech, handing it out in class with only one instruction. Highlight every line that made you feel something. In South Africa, artists took to the streets, painting fresh murals of Traore not as a politician, but as a roaring lion beneath a sun made of African flags. The words "not asking for pity, demanding respect" were splashed across concrete and canvas. Even beyond Africa, the world took notice. At Columbia University, A group of political science students held an emergency seminar to analyze the implications of Traore's message. In Paris, the usually stoic Le Monde ran a rare front-page headline: L'Afrique parle et le monde écoute. Africa speaks and the world listens. But the most surprising ripple came from within Western capitals themselves. In Washington, a panel was hastily assembled by the Council on Foreign Relations to examine the future of U.S.-Africa relations in light of recent developments. The room was packed. A former ambassador to Nigeria leaned into her mic and said, "Let's be clear. This wasn't just a speech. This was a reckoning. Africa has stopped whispering. And we weren't ready." Back at the summit in Johannesburg, delegations from across the global south requested one-on-one meetings with Traore, some to learn, some to strategize, some just to say thank you. Ghana's president extended an invitation for a joint Africa First Forum to be held in Accra next year. Tanzania offered to fund a youth innovation exchange based on Traore's educational proposal. Nigeria pledged to review its mining contracts and invited Burkina Faso to sit in on new negotiations. The dominoes were falling. In the corridors of the summit, conversations grew louder, more candid. Leaders from Latin America shared experiences of Western exploitation that mirrored Africa. Ministers from Southeast Asia offered tech partnerships. The air was alive with possibility, but not everyone was pleased. Representatives from a few Western nations grew increasingly nervous. Their talking points focused on aid. Stabilization and soft diplomacy sounded thin in comparison to the raw authenticity of what had just unfolded. One European delegate was overheard muttering, "He's disrupting the script." Indeed, he was, and the world was improvising. That evening, in the private lounge of the Intercontinental Hotel where most summit leaders were staying, Traore sat with his closest advisors. He wasn't celebrating, he was strategizing. "Now is when they will try to flatter us," he said, "to tame the fire." An aide asked, "How do we respond?" "By building faster than they can distract," he replied. Then unexpectedly, a knock at the door. It was Donald Trump. He wasn't flanked by aides. No cameras, just him. Traore rose but didn't offer his hand right away. Trump nodded, just wanted to say, "I've been in this game a long time, seen a lot of speeches. Yours hit different." Traore said nothing. "I still don't agree with everything," Trump added, "but I respect it. You said what no one else would say. Hell, maybe even what needed to be said." Still silence. Trump sighed. "This world, it's a game, kid. You either play it or you get played." "I'm not here to play," Traore finally said. "I'm here to rewrite the rules." They stared at each other for a moment that felt like a century. Then Trump chuckled. "You've got guts, kid. That's rare, don't lose it." And with that, he turned and left. The door clicked shut behind him, and the room fell into a silence thick with realization. This wasn't just about Africa anymore. This was about power, about truth, about reclaiming dignity in a world built on imbalance. And the world wasn't just watching, it was shifting. Later that night, in Ouagadougou, a crowd gathered in front of the presidential palace. They sang, they danced, but mostly, they chanted one phrase: "He spoke for us, he spoke for us, he spoke for us." Old men wept, young women held candles. Children mimicked the moment Traore held up the cobalt stone. And in their eyes, for the first time in a long time, there was something new. Not just pride, not just hope, but power. Morning in Johannesburg came with a different rhythm. It wasn't just the sunrise that felt new. It was the air. Something had changed. The city hummed with a quiet electricity, like it was standing on the edge of something. Like the world had tilted slightly, and everyone had felt it. Across the African continent, from the sands of the Sahel to the shores of Zanzibar, that shift was undeniable. In a schoolyard in Dakar, children took turns pretending to be Traore, mimicking his walk, his voice, the way he had lifted that piece of cobalt into the air. They didn't know every word, but they knew how it made them feel strong. In Accra, a vendor blasted the clip of Traore's speech from a loudspeaker mounted to his stall. People stopped, not to argue, but to listen, to nod, to remember. In Kigali, university students drafted an open letter to their government, demanding local ownership of mineral resources, quoting Traore's speech word for word. They called it the Johannesburg Doctrine. In Lagos, a fashion label announced a new streetwear line named Africa First, not as a trend but as a declaration. The spark had become a fire, and that fire had a face. In Burkina Faso, murals of Traore now stretched across concrete walls and village huts alike. His image, part soldier, part symbol, was no longer just a man. He was a movement, but he didn't let it go to his head. Just days after the summit, Traore returned home to Ouagadougou and went straight to work. No red carpets, no celebration, just blueprints, field visits, and meetings with young entrepreneurs. He held a televised town hall in the capital and began laying out the foundation of what he called the Africa First Initiative, a bold continent-wide strategy focused on three pillars: resource sovereignty. All future mining, oil and gas contracts in Burkina Faso would now require at least 51% local ownership. No more deals signed in secret. No more profits that left the soil where they were born. Youth empowerment. The government would fund 100 innovation labs across the country. Tech, agriculture, health, energy, wherever young minds dream. The state would support transparency and anti-corruption. A new watchdog agency with prosecutorial powers would investigate and prosecute financial crimes at every level, including his own cabinet. No one is above the people, he said. Not even me. The reactions were swift. Ghana announced it would review all foreign mining leases signed in the last 2 decades. Senegal passed a bill prioritizing youth-led agribusiness projects. Kenya's president invited Traore for a joint summit on Pan-African digital sovereignty. Even oil-rich Nigeria, often resistant to sweeping reforms, expressed interest in replicating the 51% rule. But what shook the world most wasn't what African leaders were doing. It was how African citizens were responding. In marketplaces, in mosques, in buses and bars and boardrooms, people weren't just talking about Traore, they were acting. A fisherman in Sierra Leone stopped selling to an international buyer who underpaid him and started a local co-op. A nurse in Togo launched a blog exposing corruption in the public health sector. A 16-year-old coder in Nairobi created an app that tracks mineral exports in real time, called it Truth Map, and made it free. Traore had not just changed policy, he had changed people. He had reminded a continent of its worth and the world of its weight. Meanwhile, in the West, something else was happening. The old narratives of Africa as a burden, as broken, as backward, began to crack under the pressure of Traore's truth. Think tanks debated. Editorials reversed tone. Television panels that once invited African experts now invited actual Africans. And one by one, the eyes of the world began to widen. They saw Emmanuel, the boy Traore spoke of, not as a statistic, but as a son of the soil whose dreams deserved respect. They saw Africa not as a place to be pitied, but a partner to be honored. Still, Traore knew the danger. Movements this big scare the systems that benefit from silence. He told his cabinet, "We've won their attention. Now we must win their respect through action." And action came fast. Within months, the Africa First Initiative had expanded into a continent-wide coalition with 18 countries formally signed on. Regional banks pledged billions in support. A Pan-African resource exchange was announced to allow Africans to buy and trade their own resources and their own terms. But most powerful of all, the belief that Africa could lead, could negotiate, could dream out loud. In his next address, Traore stood before a gathering of the coalition's founding members and said, "We are not asking the world to kneel. We are asking it to rise with us." He paused, scanning the room. "From now on, we do not wait for permission. We do not wait for applause. We do not wait." He stepped back from the microphone, and the applause didn't come in waves. It came like thunder. Somewhere in a village in northern Burkina Faso, a boy named Emmanuel, yes, the real one, sat on a wooden bench under a tree. His mother was beside him. In front of them, a new well was being dug. Clean water was coming. Beside it, a plaque read, "Funded by the Africa First Youth Fund, inspired by a dream, spoken by a president, built by a people." He looked up at the sky, wide and open and endless, and he smiled, because for the first time, it wasn't just hope he felt, it was history. his history being made. And in that moment, Africa wasn't rising. Africa had already risen.